The silent mind is often misunderstood as the absence of thought, but what you are about to explore is something far more precise and far more natural. In this journey, you will not be asked to stop thinking, control attention, or force calm. Instead, you will discover how silence already exists beneath mental activity, how the brain behaves when nothing is demanded of it, and how thought gradually shifts from center stage to background noise. You will move through the biology of mental quiet, learning what happens in the nervous system when prediction softens, effort dissolves, and attention no longer needs an object. You will hear how silence is not a psychological trick, but a physiological state the body knows how to enter on its own. And as this understanding settles, the mind is no longer asked to become quiet. It simply loses the need to speak. Nothing here requires effort or belief. You are only invited to listen as the conditions that support a silent mind begin to form naturally, allowing awareness to rest while the body follows its own rhythm towards sleep. Silence in the brain does not mean the absence of activity, nor does it imply that thought has been eliminated or suppressed. On the contrary, the brain is always active, even in its quietest states. What changes is not the presence of neural activity, but the way that activity is organized. In a silent mind, neural networks stop competing for priority. Predictive loops soften, internal commentary loses urgency, and signals no longer demand interpretation. Silence is therefore not emptiness, but a state of low interference. The brain remains fully functional, but no longer insists on constant output. From a neurological perspective, silence emerges when large-scale networks reduce unnecessary signaling. Regions associated with constant evaluation, narration, and prediction become less dominant. At the same time, regulatory systems that support stability and integration become more influential. This shift does not require effort or intention. It occurs naturally when demand decreases. The brain is designed to quiet itself when it no longer needs to prepare, explain, or anticipate. Silence is not achieved, it is revealed when pressure fades. Importantly, silence is not the opposite of thinking. Thoughts may still appear, but they no longer pull attention toward them. The brain stops treating every mental event as meaningful or urgent. This reduces cognitive load without suppressing function. Neural activity continues, but it becomes background rather than foreground. The mind does not go blank, it becomes spacious. Silence is the absence of insistence, not the absence of content. This state is closely linked to how the brain processes prediction. Much of mental noise comes from constant forecasting, anticipating what might happen next, and preparing responses in advance. When the brain determines that prediction is unnecessary, these loops begin to unwind. The nervous system shifts from readiness to sufficiency. Silence arises when the brain recognizes that nothing is required of it in the moment. Prediction relaxes, and with it, mental noise diminishes. Physiologically, this transition is supported by changes in neural rhythm and connectivity. Slower, more coherent patterns of activity become dominant. Communication between regions becomes less fragmented and more synchronized. This does not slow the brain in a damaging way. It optimizes it for rest and integration. Silence supports efficiency by reducing redundancy. The brain conserves energy by doing less, not by doing nothing. Crucially, the brain does not need to be instructed to enter this state. Attempts to force silence often increase activity by reintroducing effort and monitoring. True silence appears when monitoring stops. When attention is no longer tasked with control, the brain defaults to its most economical configuration. This is why silence often arrives unexpectedly, in moments where nothing is being managed. The brain quiets itself when it is trusted to do so. As you listen now, the brain is already capable of this silent organization. Nothing needs to be changed or removed. Neural activity can continue freely without demanding interpretation. The systems that generate commentary and prediction begin to soften naturally when they are no longer required. Silence does not need to be created. It becomes apparent as the brain recognizes that it is safe to remain quiet. In this recognition, the mind begins to rest, and the conditions for deeper calm and sleep start to form without effort. Thought is not inherently disruptive. It becomes disruptive only when the brain treats it as foreground information that requires response. In a silent mind, thoughts do not disappear, but their status changes. They continue to arise as spontaneous neural events, yet they are no longer promoted to priority signals. The brain stops amplifying them through evaluation, judgment, or narrative construction. Thought becomes comparable to ambient sound present, but not demanding attention. Silence emerges not from the absence of thought, but from the absence of obligation to engage with it. From a neuroscientific perspective, thoughts are brief activations within distributed neural networks. Most of these activations are transient and self-resolving. Mental noise arises when the brain repeatedly reactivates these signals through feedback loops. When attention attaches to a thought, the brain interprets it as relevant and continues to elaborate it. In a silent mind, this elaboration does not occur. The initial signal fades naturally without reinforcement. Background noise remains background because it is not fed additional energy. This shift does not require suppression or control. Suppression increases monitoring, which paradoxically strengthens the very activity it attempts to reduce. Silence develops when monitoring relaxes. The brain learns, through reduced demand, that not every thought needs to be tracked. This learning is physiological rather than cognitive. Neural systems responsible for salience detection reduce their sensitivity. Thoughts lose their capacity to pull attention automatically. Silence is the result of lowered reactivity, not increased discipline. Importantly, treating thought as background does not impair cognition. The brain remains capable of focused thinking when required. Silence does not eliminate capacity, it preserves it. By allowing most thoughts to pass without engagement, the brain reduces unnecessary workload. Cognitive resources are conserved rather than depleted. This efficiency supports both rest and later performance. Silence is not cognitive shutdown, it is intelligent allocation. This backgrounding of thought is closely tied to the nervous system's assessment of safety. When the environment is perceived as non-demanding, the brain reduces its vigilance. Predictive and evaluative processes no longer need to run at high intensity. Thought activity decreases in prominence because it is no longer needed to manage uncertainty. Silence is therefore a signal of sufficiency. The brain quiets because it does not need to prepare for action. Physiologically, this state is associated with increased coherence across neural regions. Communication becomes smoother and less fragmented. Instead of rapid, competing signals, the brain favors slower, more integrated patterns. Thoughts still arise, but they dissolve into a larger field of regulation. This field does not prioritize content, it maintains balance. Background noise blends into regulation rather than interrupting it. Silence supports integration by reducing fragmentation. As you listen now, thoughts may still appear, but they are not required to go anywhere. They do not need to be followed, interpreted, or completed. The brain naturally recognizes that these signals do not demand action. Without engagement, they fade into the background where they belong. Silence does not ask for cooperation. It unfolds as attention releases effort. In this state, the mind becomes quieter, not because thoughts stop, but because they no longer matter, allowing the body and awareness to settle more deeply into rest and sleep. Mental effort is not a single action, but a layered process that keeps the mind engaged even when nothing urgent is happening. Much of this effort is subtle and habitual, arising from the brain's tendency to monitor, compare, and maintain internal continuity. The silent mind begins to form when this effort loses its function. The brain recognizes that maintaining constant internal activity is no longer necessary. This recognition does not come from instruction, but from a shift in demand. When nothing requires immediate response, mental effort naturally begins to unwind. Neuroscientifically, effort is associated with sustained activation in networks responsible for control and monitoring. These networks evolved to manage uncertainty and coordinate action. When uncertainty diminishes, their activity becomes redundant. The brain is efficient. It does not sustain effort without purpose. As demand decreases, control-related signaling reduces automatically. This reduction is gradual and proportional, not abrupt. Mental effort fades because it is no longer needed to maintain stability. Importantly, the dissolution of effort does not feel like something stopping. It feels like something no longer being held. There is no clear moment where effort ends. Instead, attention loosens its grip on maintaining internal order. The brain stops checking whether it is quiet enough, calm enough, or focused enough. Monitoring dissolves into regulation. This transition is subtle, often unnoticed, because it does not produce a distinct sensation. Silence deepens as effort becomes irrelevant. This process is supported by changes in neural coordination rather than suppression. As effort-related activity decreases, integrative patterns increase. The brain favors coherence over control. Signals synchronize rather than compete. This synchronization reduces the need for oversight, allowing systems to operate smoothly on their own. Mental effort dissolves not because the brain becomes inactive, but because it becomes more unified. Order replaces management. The nervous system plays a central role in this shift. When the system moves from readiness to rest, muscle tone decreases, breathing slows, and sensory processing becomes less vigilant. These changes send feedback to the brain, signaling that effort is unnecessary. The brain responds by reducing internal drive. Silence emerges as a physiological outcome rather than a cognitive achievement. The mind quiets because the body has already settled. Attempts to deliberately remove effort often reintroduce it. Trying to relax the mind engages the very systems that generate effort. True quiet arrives when this attempt is no longer made. The brain does not need to be persuaded. It needs permission to stop managing. This permission is given through stillness, consistency, and lack of demand. Silence arrives when effort is no longer recruited to maintain experience. As you listen now, There is no requirement to adjust or improve the mind state. Mental effort can soften on its own when it is not asked to perform. Thoughts may continue, sensations may come and go, but nothing needs to be held together. The brain recognizes that it can remain stable without effort. In this recognition, silence deepens naturally, and awareness is free to drift as the conditions for rest and sleep continue to settle without interruption. Silence is not an altered or exceptional condition of the mind. It is the brain's natural baseline when unnecessary activity subsides. The nervous system is designed to fluctuate between engagement and rest, and silence emerges when engagement is no longer required. In this state, the brain does not search for input or generate commentary to fill space. Neural systems return to economical functioning, maintaining stability with minimal signaling. Silence is therefore not created by removing something, but revealed when excess is no longer produced. The mind rests because it is allowed to do so. Baseline quiet becomes apparent when demand fades. From a physiological standpoint, baseline silence reflects a balance between excitation and inhibition across neural circuits. The brain constantly regulates these forces to prevent overload or inactivity. When external and internal demands are low, inhibitory processes gently increase, not to suppress function, but to prevent unnecessary firing. This creates a state of calm efficiency. Neural communication continues, but it is measured and coordinated. Silence represents optimal regulation rather than reduced capacity. The brain is functioning well when it is quiet. This baseline state is often overlooked because modern conditions rarely allow it to surface fully. Continuous stimulation, expectation, and self-monitoring keep engagement systems active even when no action is required. Over time, this can make silence feel unfamiliar or unreachable. Yet the underlying capacity remains intact. When stimulation decreases consistently, the brain remembers its baseline configuration. Silence returns without instruction. The mind does not need training to be quiet, it needs space. Importantly, baseline silence does not eliminate responsiveness. The brain remains alert enough to respond if conditions change. This readiness does not require constant activity. Instead, it depends on efficient regulation. Silence allows the brain to conserve resources while remaining capable. This balance is evolutionarily advantageous. The nervous system evolved to rest deeply when safe and mobilize quickly when necessary. Silence is the resting side of this cycle. This state is closely tied to the body's perception of safety. When sensory input is predictable and non-threatening, the brain reduces vigilance. Predictive and evaluative systems downshift naturally. Silence arises as a signal that the environment does not require management. The body communicates sufficiency, and the brain responds with quiet. Silence is therefore relational, emerging from interaction between body and environment rather than from effort. Sleep is an extension of this baseline silence rather than a separate phenomenon. As silence deepens, awareness loosens, and the boundary between quiet wakefulness and sleep becomes indistinct. The brain does not switch abruptly from noise to silence. It glides along a continuum of decreasing demand. Baseline quiet supports this glide. Sleep occurs when silence no longer needs to remain aware of itself. The mind rests because nothing calls it back. As you listen now, the brain is already capable of returning to this baseline state. There is no requirement to reach it or sustain it deliberately. With each moment of non-demand, silence becomes more familiar. Neural activity settles into its most efficient pattern without instruction. In this settling, the mind recognizes that quiet is not something to achieve, but something to return to. From this return, rest deepens naturally, and sleep follows as the simplest continuation of silence itself. When nothing is demanded from the organism, the nervous system does not become inactive. It reorganizes itself around efficiency and stability. In the absence of threat, urgency, or expectation, regulatory pathways quietly take precedence over reactive ones. The system shifts from readiness to sufficiency, a state in which maintaining balance becomes more important than preparing for action. Signals that once amplified attention and tension reduce their intensity. This is not a shutdown, but a recalibration. The nervous system enters a mode designed for conservation rather than output. Silence begins here, at the level of regulation. From a physiological perspective, this shift involves changes in autonomic balance. Activity associated with constant alertness softens, while pathways that support digestion, repair, and integration become more influential. This transition does not require conscious relaxation or control. It occurs naturally when the system detects the absence of demand. The body interprets stillness and predictability as information. In response, it reduces unnecessary signaling. Silence emerges as a biological response to sufficiency, not as a mental technique. Importantly, the nervous system does not require total inactivity to enter this state. Even gentle awareness without intention can support it. When there is no goal to reach and no outcome to manage, regulatory systems no longer compete with action-oriented ones. This reduces internal friction. The body no longer prepares for what is not coming. Energy previously allocated to anticipation becomes available for maintenance. Silence reflects this redistribution rather than a lack of function. This state is often mistaken for passivity, yet it is highly organized. Sensory input is still processed, but it is not elevated to priority unless necessary. Muscular tone adjusts downward without collapsing. Breathing becomes slower and more efficient without effort. These changes feed back into the nervous system, reinforcing the message that demand is low. Silence deepens as a feedback loop, supported by the body itself. Regulation becomes self-sustaining. Neural circuits involved in constant scanning and prediction become less dominant in this mode. They do not disappear, they simply wait. This waiting is essential for restoring sensitivity. When systems are not overused, they remain responsive. Silence therefore preserves capacity rather than diminishing it. The nervous system becomes quieter precisely so it can respond effectively later if required. Rest is an investment in future responsiveness. Sleep represents the deepest expression of this demand-free state. Yet the transition toward it begins long before consciousness fades. As the nervous system remains undisturbed, silence grows gradually. There is no clear boundary where wakefulness ends and rest begins. The system simply continues to reduce unnecessary effort. Silence thickens as vigilance dissolves. Sleep arrives when regulation no longer needs awareness. As you listen now, the nervous system is receiving consistent signals that nothing is required. There is no task, no threat, and no expectation to fulfill. In response, regulation settles into its most economical configuration. Silence is not being produced, it is being allowed. The body recognizes sufficiency and responds accordingly. In this recognition, internal activity softens further, supporting a smooth descent into deeper rest and sleep without any need for direction or control. Attention is often assumed to require a target, something to focus on, track, or evaluate. Yet when the nervous system enters a state of low demand, attention naturally loses its need for an object. This does not mean attention disappears. It becomes diffuse and non-selective. The brain stops assigning priority to specific signals and instead maintains a broad, even awareness. In this state, attention no longer pulls experience toward analysis or action. It rests within sensation and presence without narrowing. Silence emerges because nothing is being highlighted as more important than anything else. From a neuroscientific standpoint, object-based attention involves sustained activation of networks responsible for selection and exclusion. These networks evolved to help organisms act efficiently in complex environments. When action is unnecessary, these systems reduce their activity. The brain no longer needs to decide what to attend to and what to ignore. Attention spreads evenly rather than locking onto content. This spreading reduces cognitive tension. Silence arises as the brain releases the task of choosing. Attention without an object is inherently stable because it does not require maintenance. When attention is directed, it must be held in place through effort. When it is undirected, no effort is needed to sustain it. The brain naturally prefers this economical mode when conditions allow. Neural activity becomes smoother and less fragmented. Instead of jumping between points of interest, awareness remains continuous. Silence is supported by this continuity rather than by suppression. This form of attention does not interfere with perception. Sensory information continues to arrive, but it is not organized into narratives or judgments. Sounds, sensations, and thoughts may still be present, yet none are singled out. The brain does not ask what they mean or what should be done about them. This absence of interpretation reduces internal noise. Experience unfolds without commentary. Silence deepens because meaning-making pauses. Physiologically, this state is associated with reduced activation in circuits that support goal-directed behavior. At the same time, integrative regions that maintain global awareness remain active. The brain shifts from doing to being without losing coherence. Attention becomes a background condition rather than an active process. This background awareness is sufficient to maintain orientation without strain. Silence reflects this sufficiency. Sleep often begins in this state of objectless attention. As awareness remains open and undirected, the boundary between noticing and not noticing becomes less distinct. The brain does not abruptly turn attention off. It allows it to fade naturally. Silence supports this fading by removing the need to stay engaged. Attention no longer anchors awareness to wakefulness. Sleep emerges when attention is no longer required to be present. As you listen now, there is no need to focus on any particular sound, sensation, or idea. Attention does not need to be placed or held. It can remain open, resting without direction. The brain recognizes that nothing requires selection. In this openness, internal activity becomes quieter without effort. Silence grows naturally as attention releases its object, allowing awareness to soften further and the body to continue its gentle movement toward deeper rest and sleep. Much of what creates mental noise is not thought itself, but prediction layered on top of perception. The brain is fundamentally a predictive system, continuously estimating what will happen next in order to reduce uncertainty. These predictions are usually subtle, automatic, and constant. They prepare the body for response, even when no response is required. When prediction is active, the mind feels busy because it is always slightly ahead of the present moment. Silence begins to emerge when this forward projection loses relevance. The mind quiets when it no longer needs to anticipate. From a biological standpoint, prediction consumes energy because it requires maintaining models of the future. Neural circuits repeatedly compare incoming signals with expected outcomes, adjusting internal states accordingly. When the environment is stable and non-demanding, this constant forecasting becomes unnecessary. The brain detects that prediction no longer improves safety or efficiency. As a result, predictive signaling gradually decreases. This reduction is not sudden. It unfolds as confidence in the present moment grows. Silence develops as the brain settles back into direct experience. Importantly, stopping prediction does not impair functioning. The brain remains capable of rapid forecasting if conditions change. Predictive systems do not shut down, they pause. This pause restores sensitivity by preventing overuse. When prediction quiets, perception becomes more immediate and less filtered. Experience is no longer constantly compared to what might come next. The mind rests in what is happening rather than what could happen. Silence reflects this shift toward immediacy. This transition is supported by changes in bodily regulation. As muscle tone decreases and breathing slows, feedback to the brain signals reduced need for readiness. The nervous system confirms that action is unlikely. Predictive loops loosen in response. The body communicates safety through physiology rather than thought. The mind listens by becoming quieter. Silence is therefore not a cognitive decision, but a systemic response to embodied information. When prediction fades, time perception often changes. The sense of urgency softens, and moments feel less segmented. Without constantly preparing for what follows, the brain experiences continuity rather than sequence. This continuity reduces internal narration. The mind no longer needs to explain where it is going. Silence grows because the story of the future is no longer being rehearsed. Awareness becomes less directional and more settled. Sleep depends on this suspension of prediction. As long as the brain continues to anticipate and prepare, wakefulness is maintained. When prediction relaxes sufficiently, there is no reason to remain alert. The transition into sleep is not forced. It occurs when forecasting is no longer needed. Silence thickens as the future dissolves from attention. The mind no longer looks ahead. Rest becomes possible because the present is enough. As you listen now, there is nothing ahead that requires preparation. The brain receives repeated confirmation that the immediate environment is stable and predictable. In response, predictive activity softens naturally. There is no need to imagine what comes next. Awareness can remain with what is already here without projecting forward. In this absence of prediction, mental noise diminishes. Silence deepens gently, allowing the mind and body to settle together into a state where sleep can arise effortlessly, without anticipation or effort. Silence is often framed as a mental achievement, yet at its core, it is a biological state that emerges when regulation reaches equilibrium. The brain does not generate silence through intention. It enters silence when physiological conditions support it. Neural activity reorganizes around balance rather than output. Systems that amplify urgency, evaluation, and prediction reduce their influence. What remains is a stable pattern of low interference, signaling that supports coherence. Silence is therefore not an idea or a belief, but an embodied condition. The mind becomes quiet because the body has already settled. From a systems perspective, this biological silence reflects optimal nervous system regulation. Excitatory and inhibitory processes balance each other precisely, preventing both agitation and collapse. The brain remains responsive but not reactive. Sensory input is processed without escalation. Internal signals are coordinated without competition. This balance allows the system to function with minimal noise. Silence is the expression of efficiency rather than absence. The brain works well when it is quiet. This state is reinforced through feedback loops between body and brain. As breathing becomes slower and more regular, and as muscle tone decreases, afferent signals inform the brain that vigilance is unnecessary. The brain responds by reducing internal drive. This reduction further calms the body, creating a self-stabilizing loop. Silence deepens not because it is pursued, but because regulation supports it. The system settles into stillness organically. No component needs to lead this process. Importantly, biological silence does not eliminate consciousness. Awareness may remain present without being active. There is no requirement to monitor experience or maintain orientation. The brain does not need to comment on what is happening. Silence allows awareness to exist without effort. This effortless awareness does not demand continuation. It can remain or fade without consequence. Silence creates the conditions where awareness is optional rather than necessary. Sleep arises naturally from this state because wakefulness no longer serves a function. When silence is established biologically, there is no signal that requires the mind to remain engaged. The transition into sleep is therefore not abrupt. It is a gradual deepening of the same regulatory pattern. Silence thickens as awareness loosens. Sleep does not interrupt silence, it extends it. The brain simply continues along the same trajectory. This understanding reframes silence as something reliable and repeatable, not fragile or elusive. The body knows how to enter this state when conditions allow. There is no need to search for silence or recreate it artificially. Removing demand is sufficient. The nervous system responds predictably to sufficiency. Silence appears because it is the natural response to nothing being required. As you listen now, the body is already moving within this biological silence. Regulation is steady, demand is absent, and internal systems are aligned. Nothing needs to be added or adjusted. Silence does not need to be noticed to continue. Awareness may remain softly present or begin to dissolve. Either way, the biological state remains intact. In this sustained quiet, the mind rests because it no longer needs to do anything at all, and sleep unfolds naturally as the deepest expression of this same silent, stable condition. When the brain is not engaged in a specific task, it does not become inactive. It shifts into what neuroscience calls a default mode of operation. This mode is often misunderstood as mental idleness, yet it represents a highly organized baseline state. The default mode network coordinates internal processes such as memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and self-referential processing. In a silent mind, this network remains active, but loses its tendency to generate constant narrative. Internal activity becomes diffuse rather than directive. Silence emerges not because the brain stops functioning, but because it stops insisting on interpretation. The default state becomes quieter when demand is low. Under normal conditions, the default mode network can generate significant mental noise, especially when it becomes overactive. Rumination, self-evaluation, and repetitive thinking often arise when this network attempts to resolve unresolved signals. However, when the nervous system detects sufficiency, the default mode softens its output. It no longer needs to rehearse scenarios or maintain a sense of continuity through narrative. The brain allows internal activity to remain unstructured. Silence appears as the default mode releases its grip on meaning-making. The mind rests because nothing needs to be explained. This quieting does not eliminate the default mode network, it rebalances it. The network continues to support integration and memory without producing commentary. Neural activity remains present, but it becomes less linguistic and less evaluative. The brain processes information without converting it into story. Silence is supported by this non-narrative integration. The mind remains coherent without narration. Internal continuity no longer requires words or concepts. From a physiological standpoint, this shift reflects reduced interaction between the default mode network and salience networks that flag urgency. When nothing is marked as important, internal activity loses priority. The brain stops scanning its own contents for relevance. Thoughts may still appear, but they are not elevated. Silence deepens because internal signals are no longer competing for attention. The default mode becomes a background regulator rather than a foreground narrator. This state is closely linked to rest and safety. The default mode network evolved to maintain internal coherence when external action is unnecessary. When the environment is predictable and non-threatening, the brain prefers this quiet baseline. Silence is therefore not an achievement, it is a return. The mind does not need to manage itself when it is not being challenged. The default mode supports rest by minimizing output. Quiet becomes the most efficient configuration. Sleep builds directly on this softened default state. As the default mode network remains active without narrative, awareness begins to lose its anchor. The boundary between quiet wakefulness and sleep becomes thin. The brain does not need to switch modes abruptly. Silence thickens as narrative dissolves further. Sleep emerges naturally when the default state no longer requires awareness to accompany it. As you listen now, the brain is already capable of resting in this quiet default mode. There is no need to follow internal content or maintain a sense of continuity. Internal activity can remain present without becoming story. The default state holds coherence without effort. In this holding, silence becomes familiar rather than exceptional. Awareness can soften safely, supported by a brain that knows how to remain organized without narration, allowing rest to deepen naturally towards sleep. A significant portion of mental activity is devoted not to perception, but to self-reference. The continuous process of relating experience back to a sense of me. The brain constantly evaluates what events mean for identity, memory, and continuity. In a silent mind, this self-referential loop gradually loses prominence. Experience is no longer automatically framed in relation to a central observer. The brain stops asking how each sensation, thought, or feeling fits into a personal narrative. Silence begins when experience no longer needs to be owned. Awareness remains, but without constant self-assignment. Neuroscientifically, self-reference is closely tied to specific patterns within the default mode network. These patterns support autobiographical memory, future projection, and internal commentary. When demand decreases, the relevance of these functions diminishes. The brain recognizes that maintaining a strong sense of self-continuity is unnecessary in the moment. Activity within self-referential circuits softens. This does not erase identity. It temporarily relaxes its importance. Silence emerges as self-reference becomes optional rather than compulsory. This fading of self-reference does not feel like loss, it feels like relief. Without the need to position experience within a personal frame, mental effort decreases substantially. The brain no longer needs to evaluate whether sensations are pleasant or unpleasant, useful or threatening. Experience unfolds without constant tagging. This reduces internal friction. Silence deepens because nothing is being compared to an internal standard. The mind rests because it no longer needs to define itself moment by moment. Physiologically, this shift is supported by changes in autonomic tone. As the body relaxes, signals associated with vigilance and self-monitoring reduce. The brain receives feedback that orientation and control are unnecessary. In response, self-referential processing quiets further. This creates a reinforcing loop. Less self-focus leads to deeper bodily calm, which further reduces the need for self-reference. Silence stabilizes through this mutual support. Importantly, the capacity for self-reference remains intact. The brain does not lose its ability to recognize identity or respond to personal relevance. These systems simply remain dormant until needed. Silence preserves function by allowing rest. Overuse of self-referential processing leads to fatigue and noise. Quiet allows these systems to reset. The mind becomes clearer precisely because it stops talking about itself. Sleep depends heavily on this reduction of self-reference. As long as the brain maintains a strong sense of "I am here," experiencing, wakefulness persists. When this sense loosens, awareness no longer needs to remain present. Sleep does not arrive by force. It arrives when self-reference fades enough to release awareness. Silence thickens as identity softens. The boundary between observer and experience dissolves gently. As you listen now, there is no requirement to relate what is happening back to yourself. Sensations, sounds, and thoughts can exist without ownership. The brain recognizes that nothing needs to be tracked or remembered. Self-reference can rest. In this rest, internal activity becomes quieter and less personal. Silence deepens naturally, supporting a state where awareness can remain without identity or fade without consequence, allowing the body to continue its smooth progression toward deeper rest and sleep. Much of mental tension arises from boundaries the brain continuously maintains between inside and outside, self and environment, observer and observed. These boundaries are functional during action, but unnecessary during rest. In a silent mind, the effort required to maintain sharp internal distinctions gradually diminishes. The brain no longer needs to separate experience into compartments. Sensory input, bodily sensation, and internal activity begin to feel less divided. Silence grows as the mind stops organizing experience into discrete regions. Boundaries soften because they are no longer required to guide behavior. From a neurobiological perspective, maintaining boundaries involves constant integration and comparison across sensory and cognitive systems. The brain differentiates between internal signals and external stimuli to support orientation and response. When response is not needed, this differentiation becomes redundant. The nervous system reduces the precision of these distinctions. Signals are processed without being classified as belonging strictly to one domain. This reduction in categorization lowers cognitive load. Silence emerges as the brain simplifies how it organizes experience. This softening does not produce confusion or disorientation. Instead, it creates a sense of continuity. Experience feels less segmented and more unified. The brain no longer needs to track where one sensation ends and another begins. Without this tracking, attention rests more evenly. Internal dialogue loses relevance because there is less to label or define. Silence deepens as experience becomes seamless rather than structured. The mind rests because it no longer needs to divide. Physiologically, this shift is supported by changes in sensory processing. Sensory thresholds adjust downward, not to dull perception, but to reduce contrast. The nervous system favors smooth integration over sharp distinction. This reduces the need for vigilance. Muscular and postural systems also contribute by releasing tension that reinforces separation. As the body softens, so do perceptual boundaries. Silence stabilizes as the system aligns around continuity. This state supports deeper rest because fragmentation requires effort. Maintaining boundaries demands constant correction and monitoring. When boundaries soften, the brain conserves energy. Regulation becomes global rather than localized. Silence reflects this global regulation. The mind no longer needs to manage multiple internal zones. Everything is held within a single, coherent field of processing. Rest becomes more complete because nothing is being kept apart. Sleep depends on this dissolution of internal boundaries. As long as the brain maintains a clear distinction between observer and environment, wakefulness persists. When this distinction relaxes, awareness loses its anchor. The transition into sleep is facilitated by this loss of separation. Silence thickens as boundaries dissolve further. Sleep does not interrupt experience, it absorbs it. The mind does not cross into sleep, it diffuses into it. As you listen now, there is no need to maintain a sense of separation between what is happening inside and outside. Sounds, sensations, and thoughts can blend without classification. The brain recognizes that boundaries are unnecessary. In this recognition, internal structure softens, silence deepens as experience becomes continuous rather than divided. Awareness can remain gently present or fade entirely, supported by a system that no longer needs to define where anything begins or ends, allowing rest and sleep to unfold naturally. At this stage, awareness no longer organizes itself around a center. There is no focal point from which experience is monitored or directed. The brain does not position awareness behind the eyes or within the body. Instead, awareness becomes distributed without a clear origin or destination. This does not reduce clarity. It removes the need for orientation. Experience continues, but without reference to a central observer. Silence deepens because nothing is being overseen. Awareness exists without direction, and nothing is required of it. From a neurological perspective, this shift reflects a reduction in coordinated activity that supports spatial and narrative anchoring. Systems that normally locate experience within a body-centered frame become less active. The brain no longer needs to answer the question of where awareness is. Processing becomes global rather than localized. Signals are integrated without being routed through a central point. Silence arises as the need for internal positioning dissolves. Awareness becomes a condition rather than an activity. This state feels effortless because effort depends on orientation. When awareness has no center, there is nothing to maintain. The brain no longer needs to check alignment or continuity. Without a reference point, internal monitoring loses relevance. Thought becomes sparse, not because it is blocked, but because it has nowhere to attach. Silence grows as mental activity loses structure. The mind rests because it no longer needs to locate itself within experience. Physiologically, this is supported by further reductions in muscular tone and postural engagement. The body no longer signals the need for orientation or readiness. Proprioceptive input softens, reinforcing the absence of a central reference. The nervous system interprets this as permission to disengage from spatial tracking. Awareness becomes diffuse and uncontained. Silence stabilizes because nothing is being held together. The system remains coherent without a center. This condition is closely aligned with the threshold of sleep. As long as awareness remains centered, wakefulness persists. When centering dissolves, awareness no longer has a reason to stay present. The transition into sleep does not require loss of consciousness. It requires loss of reference. Silence thickens as direction disappears. Sleep arrives when awareness no longer needs to be anywhere. The boundary between being aware and being asleep becomes indistinct. Importantly, this is not a loss of control, because control is no longer relevant. The brain does not need to manage experience when nothing demands response. Systems remain capable but inactive. Awareness without center is safe because the environment is stable and predictable. Silence reflects trust in regulation rather than vigilance. The mind no longer needs to watch itself. Rest becomes complete because nothing is missing. As you listen now, there is no need to locate awareness or follow where it goes. It does not need to stay with the voice or the body. Awareness can remain without position or fade without consequence. The brain recognizes that centering is unnecessary. In this absence of direction, internal activity settles further. Silence deepens into a state where rest no longer requires awareness at all, and sleep unfolds naturally as the system continues quietly, without center, without effort, and without interruption. Mental effort is not the same as mental activity. It is the additional force applied to maintain, control, or shape experience. Much of waking cognition is sustained by this effort, even when no clear task exists. The brain continues to adjust, correct, and reinforce internal states out of habit rather than necessity. In a silent mind, this habit gradually loses relevance. The system recognizes that effort is no longer contributing to stability. When effort ceases to serve a function, it dissolves naturally. Silence begins where effort ends. From a neurophysiological perspective, effort corresponds to sustained engagement of control-related networks that coordinate attention, inhibition, and goal maintenance. These networks are metabolically expensive and designed for periods of action, not rest. When the environment remains predictable and non-demanding, the brain reduces reliance on these systems. Control signaling weakens. Activity becomes more evenly distributed rather than tightly managed. The brain conserves energy by allowing regulation to proceed without supervision. Silence emerges as an outcome of efficiency. This reduction of effort does not feel like stopping something intentionally. There is no internal command that says effort should end. Instead, effort simply becomes unnecessary. The brain no longer checks whether it is doing enough or being attentive enough. Monitoring fades. What remains is a steady, self-regulating process that requires no intervention. Silence deepens because nothing is being held in place. Experience continues without maintenance. Importantly, the end of mental effort does not reduce clarity or awareness. In fact, clarity often increases because noise generated by over-control disappears. The mind becomes simpler, not duller. Sensations and thoughts may still appear, but they do not require management. The brain trusts its own regulatory capacity. Silence reflects this trust. The system functions smoothly because it is no longer overmanaged. The body plays a crucial role in signaling that effort can end. As posture relaxes and breathing becomes regular, afferent signals inform the brain that readiness is unnecessary. Muscle tone no longer supports action. This feedback reduces activation in effort-related circuits. The brain responds by letting go of internal tension. Silence grows as a whole-body phenomenon, not as a mental choice. Effort dissolves because the body has already settled. Sleep depends on this cessation of effort. As long as effort persists, wakefulness is maintained. When effort fully dissolves, there is no reason to remain alert. The transition into sleep is therefore smooth and continuous. Silence thickens as effort fades completely. Sleep does not interrupt mental activity, it absorbs it. The mind rests because it is no longer being asked to work. As you listen now, there is no need to try to relax or to stop effort deliberately. Effort ends on its own when it is no longer required. The brain recognizes that regulation is sufficient without control. In this recognition, internal tension releases. Silence deepens naturally as the system moves into its most economical state. From here, rest continues effortlessly, and sleep follows as the natural continuation of a mind that no longer needs to do anything at all. Control is a strategy the brain uses when outcomes feel uncertain. It regulates attention, posture, thought, and internal tone in order to maintain predictability. However, when uncertainty fades, control becomes redundant. In a silent mind, the brain gradually recognizes that active regulation is no longer improving stability. Systems that once coordinated behavior step back. What replaces control is not chaos, but self-organization. Silence deepens when the brain stops correcting what is already balanced. From a biological perspective, control requires constant comparison between expected and actual states. This comparison consumes energy and generates internal signaling. When the environment remains stable and the body is at rest, discrepancies decrease. The brain no longer detects meaningful error. Without error signals, corrective control loops disengage. Regulation shifts from top-down management to distributed equilibrium. Silence emerges as the system settles into this equilibrium naturally. This transition often feels like a release rather than an action. There is no moment of deciding to stop controlling. Control fades because it no longer finds anything to adjust. The brain stops checking alignment, stops monitoring progress, stops reinforcing position. Internal processes continue without oversight. Silence grows because nothing is being steered. Experience unfolds without supervision, and this unfolding is sufficient. Importantly, the absence of control does not reduce safety. Control is not the source of stability. It is a response to instability. When stability is present, control can rest. The nervous system remains capable of rapid re-engagement if needed. Control is not lost, it is dormant. Silence reflects confidence in regulation rather than vulnerability. The system remains intact without being managed. Physiological cues reinforce this state. As breathing becomes rhythmic and unforced, and as muscular engagement decreases, the brain receives continuous confirmation that intervention is unnecessary. This confirmation quiets control-related circuits further. A feedback loop forms in which non-interference supports deeper balance. Silence stabilizes because nothing interrupts it. The body and brain agree that control is no longer required. Sleep depends on this release. As long as control remains active, wakefulness persists. Control keeps awareness anchored and responsive. When control disengages fully, awareness loses its task. Silence thickens as regulation continues autonomously. Sleep arrives when nothing is being guided. The mind does not need to shut down, it simply stops supervising. As you listen now, there is no need to hold posture, attention, or understanding in place. Control can rest completely. The brain recognizes that balance is already present. In this recognition, internal management dissolves. Silence becomes stable because it is no longer interrupted by correction. From this state, rest deepens smoothly, and sleep continues as the natural outcome of a system that no longer needs to control itself. When intervention is no longer applied, regulation does not collapse, it becomes more precise. The brain is fundamentally designed to regulate itself through layered feedback systems that operate continuously without supervision. Intervention is only required when these systems detect instability. In a silent mind, instability is absent, so regulation proceeds autonomously. Neural activity organizes itself around balance rather than correction. Silence emerges because nothing is being adjusted. The system functions optimally when it is allowed to do so without interference. From a neurobiological standpoint, autonomous regulation relies on distributed processing rather than centralized command. Multiple regions coordinate through mutual signaling, maintaining coherence without hierarchy. When intervention stops, these networks synchronize more efficiently, redundant signaling decreases, and communication becomes smoother. The brain no longer needs to amplify control signals to maintain order. Silence reflects this streamlined coordination. Regulation becomes quieter because it becomes more effective. This state feels stable because it does not depend on vigilance. The brain no longer scans for errors or deviations. Instead, it trusts ongoing feedback to maintain equilibrium. This trust is not conscious. It is embedded in the architecture of regulation itself. Without the need to intervene, internal processes unfold without tension. Silence deepens as monitoring dissolves. Experience continues without management, and this continuation is sufficient. Physiologically, This shift is reinforced by the absence of corrective muscular and postural engagement. The body no longer signals the need for readiness or adjustment. Proprioceptive input becomes minimal and even. This calm bodily state feeds back into the nervous system, confirming that regulation is stable. The brain responds by remaining quiet. Silence becomes self-reinforcing because no signal interrupts it. Importantly, regulation without intervention preserves adaptability. Systems remain sensitive and responsive, ready to engage if conditions change. Autonomy does not imply rigidity. Instead, it allows rapid response because resources are not consumed by unnecessary oversight. Silence supports readiness by conserving energy. The brain remains capable precisely because it is not actively managing itself. Rest becomes the foundation of responsiveness. Sleep naturally extends from this state. As regulation continues without awareness, there is no role left for conscious supervision. The mind does not need to remain present to ensure stability. Silence thickens as awareness becomes optional. Sleep does not begin with a loss of regulation. It begins with the recognition that regulation does not require awareness. The transition is seamless because nothing changes at the level of function. As you listen now, the system is already regulating itself without intervention. There is nothing to correct, guide, or maintain. The brain recognizes that balance is present. In this recognition, internal activity remains quiet and coherent. Silence stabilizes because it is uninterrupted. From here, rest deepens effortlessly, and sleep continues as the natural expression of a system that is functioning exactly as it is designed to, without effort, without supervision, and without interruption. At a certain depth of quiet, stability no longer requires awareness to accompany it. The brain does not need to be observed in order to remain organized. Regulation continues without reference to attention, intention, or monitoring. Neural systems maintain coherence because coherence is their default outcome when disturbance is absent. In this state, awareness becomes optional rather than necessary. Silence deepens because nothing depends on being noticed. Stability persists quietly, independent of observation. From a neurophysiological perspective, awareness is not the driver of regulation, but a parallel process that often accompanies it during wakefulness. When demands fall away, this parallel process loses its functional relevance. The brain does not require awareness to coordinate autonomic balance, metabolic regulation, or neural synchronization. These processes operate through closed feedback loops that do not involve consciousness. Silence reflects the autonomy of these loops. Stability is maintained because the system is self-sustaining. This autonomy removes the final layer of effort that keeps the mind awake. As long as awareness feels responsible for maintaining order, wakefulness persists. When that responsibility dissolves, awareness no longer needs to remain present. The brain recognizes that nothing will destabilize if awareness fades. Silence thickens as this recognition settles. The system does not wait for permission to continue. It proceeds calmly, without oversight. Physiologically, this state is reinforced by deep consistency in bodily signals. Breathing remains regular, muscle tone minimal, and sensory input predictable. These conditions signal that no adaptive response is required. The nervous system confirms stability repeatedly. The brain responds by allowing awareness to loosen further. Silence becomes continuous rather than intermittent. Regulation continues because nothing interrupts it. Importantly, stability without awareness does not imply vulnerability. The system remains capable of re-engaging awareness instantly if conditions change. Awareness is not lost, it is simply not recruited. Silence preserves readiness by conserving resources. The brain remains responsive precisely because it is not expending energy on unnecessary vigilance. Stability is stronger when it is unobserved. The system rests in its own reliability. Sleep arises fully from this condition. When awareness is no longer required to support regulation, there is no reason to remain awake. The transition is not dramatic or noticeable. Awareness simply fades as silence remains. Sleep does not replace stability. It reveals that stability never depended on awareness in the first place. The body continues seamlessly. Nothing shifts except the presence of observation. As you listen now, there is no need to stay aware of the silence itself. Regulation continues quietly, whether noticed or not. The brain maintains balance without effort or supervision. Awareness can remain softly present or dissolve completely. Either way, stability persists. In this final release, silence becomes uninterrupted, and rest completes itself naturally as sleep continues without boundary, without attention, and without any requirement to remain here at all. A significant portion of mental activity is organized around time, remembering what has passed, anticipating what will come, and maintaining continuity between the two. In a silent mind, this temporal grip begins to loosen. The brain no longer needs to constantly reference before and after. Experience stops being organized into sequence and becomes continuous. This does not eliminate memory or anticipation. It simply reduces their relevance. Silence deepens when the present moment no longer needs to be connected to a timeline. Awareness rests because it is no longer moving forward or backward. From a neuroscientific perspective, temporal processing requires coordination between memory systems and predictive networks. These systems keep the mind oriented within duration. When prediction quiets and self-reference fades, temporal markers lose urgency. The brain no longer needs to ask what time it is internally. Neural activity becomes less segmented, favoring sustained patterns over discrete events. Silence emerges as the mind stops dividing experience into moments. Time becomes less noticeable because it is no longer being tracked. This shift often feels like a softening rather than a change. There is no moment when time stops. It simply becomes less central. The brain no longer checks how long something has lasted or how much remains. Without this checking, internal pacing dissolves. Experience unfolds without countdown or progression. Silence grows because nothing is being measured. The mind rests when it no longer needs to keep time. Physiologically, this is supported by rhythmic stabilization across systems. Breathing, heart rate, and neural oscillations settle into regular patterns that do not signal urgency. These rhythms communicate continuity rather than transition. The nervous system interprets this as permission to disengage from temporal tracking. The brain responds by reducing time-based organization. Silence reflects this rhythmic sufficiency. Experience becomes steady rather than sequential. Sleep relies heavily on this loss of temporal grip. As long as the brain continues to track time, wakefulness is maintained. When time loses relevance, there is no reason to remain oriented. The transition into sleep is facilitated by this disorientation. Silence thickens as temporal awareness dissolves. Sleep does not arrive at a moment. It arrives when moments no longer matter. The boundary fades because time fades. Importantly, this does not impair the brain's ability to reorient to time later. Temporal processing remains intact and ready. Silence allows these systems to rest without degrading function. By releasing time temporarily, the brain preserves its capacity to use it when needed. Rest is deeper because nothing is being counted or compared. Silence supports restoration by suspending internal clocks. As you listen now, there is no need to know how long you have been here or how much remains. The brain does not need to track progression. Experience can continue without reference to time. In this timelessness, internal activity softens further. Silence deepens naturally as duration loses meaning. From here, rest becomes more complete, and sleep continues as a state where time is no longer required to be present at all. Mental activity is often organized as a sequence, one thought leading to the next, one sensation triggering interpretation, one moment preparing the following one. This sequencing gives the mind a sense of movement and progression. In a silent mind, this chain-like organization begins to loosen. Thoughts no longer need to follow each other in order. Sensations do not require explanation or continuation. Experience ceases to feel like a line and becomes more like a field. Silence deepens when the mind no longer moves from point to point. From a neuroscientific perspective, sequencing relies on predictive and associative networks that link events into coherent order. These networks are highly active during planning, problem-solving, and narrative thinking. When demand decreases, their activity becomes unnecessary. The brain stops linking one internal event to the next. Neural firing becomes less directional and more evenly distributed. This does not interrupt processing, it simplifies it. Silence arises as the brain stops constructing internal chains. This collapse of sequencing does not feel disorienting. Instead, it often brings relief. Without the need to maintain continuity, the mind releases effort. There is no requirement to remember what just happened or anticipate what should follow. Experience stands on its own, complete without connection. The brain no longer checks whether something is finished or ongoing. Silence grows because nothing needs to be continued. The mind rests when it no longer has to carry experience forward. Physiologically, this shift is supported by a reduction in cortical arousal associated with task persistence. Muscular micro-adjustments that accompany anticipation soften. Breathing remains steady without signaling transition. These bodily cues inform the brain that progression is unnecessary. In response, sequencing networks disengage further. The nervous system settles into continuity rather than movement. Silence reflects this settled state. Sleep depends on the suspension of sequencing. As long as the brain links internal events into a chain, awareness remains active. When this linking dissolves, awareness loses momentum. There is nothing to follow and nowhere to go. Silence thickens as internal motion fades. Sleep does not interrupt a sequence. It arrives when sequencing is no longer present. The transition is smooth because nothing needs to stop. Importantly, the capacity for sequencing remains intact. The brain does not lose its ability to organize events when required. Silence allows these networks to rest without degrading function. By suspending sequencing temporarily, the brain preserves its efficiency. Rest becomes deeper because nothing is being carried forward. Silence supports restoration by releasing the need for continuity. As you listen now, there is no requirement to follow the flow of words or hold on to meaning. Each moment can stand alone without reference to the next. The brain recognizes that sequencing is unnecessary. In this recognition, internal motion slows and then settles. Silence deepens naturally as experience becomes complete in itself, allowing rest to continue uninterrupted and sleep to unfold without sequence, without direction, and without effort. When mental sequencing dissolves, perception is no longer stretched across time. Sensory experience does not arrive as a stream that must be followed, interpreted, or retained. Instead, perception becomes momentless, unfolding without duration. The brain no longer needs to register how long a sensation lasts or whether it is changing. Experience is received without temporal framing. Silence deepens because perception no longer needs to be managed across intervals. Awareness rests as each sensation is complete the moment it appears. From a neuroscientific standpoint, duration is constructed through repeated sampling and comparison. The brain measures change by contrasting what is happening now with what happened just before. When this comparison process quiets, duration loses meaning. Neural systems stop tracking persistence and transition. Sensory input is processed without reference to continuity. This does not reduce clarity, it reduces demand. Silence emerges as the brain stops asking how long something has been present. This shift often feels like expansion rather than contraction. Without duration, perception feels spacious, even when minimal. Sounds do not begin or end, they simply exist. Sensations are not held or released, they appear and dissolve without trace. The mind no longer needs to stay with experience to ensure completion. Silence grows because nothing is being extended through time. Perception becomes light, requiring no follow-through. Physiologically, this state is supported by stable sensory thresholds and reduced orienting responses. The nervous system no longer reacts to minor changes in input. Sensory gating becomes consistent rather than alert. The brain interprets this consistency as sufficiency. Without novelty or change to track, duration becomes irrelevant. Silence reflects this settled sensory environment. Experience no longer signals the need for awareness to remain engaged. Sleep is closely tied to this loss of perceptual duration. As long as the brain continues to track how sensations evolve, wakefulness is sustained. When perception no longer unfolds across time, awareness loses its anchor. There is nothing to stay with and nothing to wait for. Silence thickens as duration collapses. Sleep arrives when perception no longer requires presence. Importantly, this does not dull sensory capacity. The brain remains fully capable of detecting change when necessary. Silence allows perceptual systems to rest without losing sensitivity. By suspending duration temporarily, the brain preserves responsiveness. Rest becomes deeper because nothing is being held open. Silence supports recovery by allowing perception to occur without effort or extension. As you listen now, there is no need to stay with any sound or sensation. Perception does not need to last. Each moment is complete without reference to the next. The brain recognizes that duration is unnecessary. In this recognition, sensory experience lightens and spreads. Silence deepens naturally as perception floats free of time, allowing rest to continue smoothly and sleep to emerge without boundary, without sequence, and without any requirement to remain aware. Mental urgency is not created by events themselves, but by the brain's interpretation that something must happen next. It is the subtle pressure that keeps awareness engaged, alert, and slightly tense, even in stillness. In a silent mind, this sense of urgency gradually dissolves. The brain no longer signals that experience must continue, resolve, or progress. Nothing feels unfinished. Silence deepens when the future stops calling for attention. Awareness rests because there is no internal demand pulling it forward. From a neurobiological perspective, urgency is maintained by circuits that prioritize action and outcome. These circuits evolved to support survival in unpredictable environments. When unpredictability disappears, their activity becomes unnecessary. The brain detects that there is no advantage in maintaining readiness. As a result, urgency-related signaling diminishes. This reduction is not abrupt. It fades as confidence in stability grows. Silence emerges as the nervous system stops preparing for what is not required. This disappearance of urgency often brings a profound sense of ease. Without pressure to continue or complete experience, the mind relaxes deeply. There is no sense of waiting for something to happen. Thoughts, sensations, and sounds do not imply consequence. The brain no longer frames experience as leading somewhere. Silence grows because nothing is being anticipated. Awareness is free to remain or dissolve without obligation. Physiologically, this state is supported by a sustained absence of stress signaling. Hormonal and autonomic systems settle into long, steady rhythms. The body no longer prepares for change. Breathing, circulation, and neural activity synchronize around maintenance rather than response. These stable rhythms confirm that urgency is unnecessary. The brain responds by remaining quiet. Silence becomes continuous because nothing interrupts it. Sleep depends strongly on the loss of urgency. As long as the brain feels that something must be done or attended to, wakefulness persists. When urgency dissolves completely, there is no reason to remain alert. Awareness no longer has a task. Silence thickens as the need to stay present fades. Sleep does not arrive as an event. It arrives as the absence of requirement. The mind rests because nothing is asking it to continue. Importantly, the capacity for urgency is not lost. The brain retains its ability to mobilize instantly if conditions change. Silence allows urgency systems to rest without degrading function. By suspending urgency temporarily, the brain preserves its effectiveness. Rest becomes deeper because nothing is being deferred or prepared. Silence supports restoration by removing pressure entirely. As you listen now, there is nothing ahead that requires attention. Nothing needs to be finished, understood, or anticipated. The brain recognizes that urgency has no role to play. In this recognition, internal pressure dissolves. Silence becomes complete because nothing remains unresolved. From here, rest deepens fully, and sleep continues naturally as awareness releases its final reason to remain present, allowing the system to remain quietly, steadily, and effortlessly at rest. At this stage, silence is no longer confined to the mind. It becomes a whole-body state. The brain does not quiet in isolation, and the body does not relax independently. Instead, silence emerges as a coordinated condition in which neural activity, autonomic regulation, and physiological rhythm align around minimal demand. The distinction between mental quiet and physical rest dissolves. Silence is no longer something perceived, it is something inhabited. The organism settles into a unified state where nothing is being mobilized. Rest becomes structural rather than momentary. From a biological perspective, this whole-body silence reflects synchronized downregulation across systems. Neural networks reduce unnecessary signaling, autonomic balance stabilizes, and metabolic processes shift toward conservation and repair. No single system initiates this change. It emerges through mutual reinforcement. As the brain quiets, the body follows, and as the body settles, the brain responds in kind. Silence is sustained because every system supports it simultaneously. This coordination makes the state stable rather than fragile. In this condition, bodily sensations lose their urgency and specificity. Sensation remains present, but it no longer signals the need for adjustment. The brain stops interpreting bodily input as information requiring response. Muscular tone remains low without collapsing. Posture maintains itself without effort, and breathing flows without regulation. The body does not need to be monitored. Silence deepens as bodily awareness becomes neutral rather than directive. Experience is held without commentary. Physiologically, this state is associated with long, coherent rhythms rather than rapid fluctuations. Heart rate variability increases, neural oscillations synchronize, and hormonal signaling favors maintenance over activation. These rhythms communicate sufficiency throughout the system. The brain interprets this as confirmation that nothing needs to change. Silence becomes continuous because there is no signal to interrupt it. The organism rests within its own reliability. Sleep arises easily from this whole-body silence because no subsystem remains engaged enough to sustain wakefulness. Awareness is no longer anchored to thought, sensation, or posture. There is nothing pulling attention back to the body or the mind. Silence thickens as the boundary between rest and sleep becomes irrelevant. Sleep is not entered. It unfolds as the natural continuation of this same integrated state. The system does not transition, it remains. Importantly, this whole-body silence does not reduce responsiveness. The organism remains capable of rapid mobilization if conditions change. Silence preserves readiness by conserving resources. The absence of activity does not imply weakness, it implies efficiency. Systems are quiet because they are aligned, not because they are depleted. Rest becomes restorative precisely because it is complete. Silence supports resilience by allowing full recovery. As you listen now, the body is already participating in this state. Nothing needs to be adjusted, released, or deepened deliberately. The brain and body recognize that alignment is present. Silence holds without effort because every system agrees. Awareness can remain gently present or fade entirely. Either way, the whole organism continues to rest in this unified quiet, allowing sleep to deepen naturally as the body remains stable, supported, and undisturbed. As silence stabilizes across the whole body, the organism gradually stops asking to be noticed. Sensations do not disappear, but they lose their ability to call awareness toward them. The body no longer signals discomfort, adjustment, or readiness. This does not mean numbness, it means sufficiency. Each system is operating within a range that does not require intervention. Silence deepens because nothing needs to be checked. The body rests not by shutting down sensation, but by no longer assigning it urgency. From a physiological standpoint, attention-seeking signals arise when systems deviate from equilibrium. Pain, tension, and restlessness are messages that request correction. In a deeply silent state, these deviations are absent or minimal. Regulatory systems maintain balance without escalation. Sensory afferents still transmit information, but it is neutral rather than directive. The brain does not interpret bodily input as a call to action. Silence emerges as the body confirms its own stability repeatedly. This condition allows awareness to detach gently from physical form. When the body stops requesting attention, awareness no longer needs to remain anchored. There is no need to scan for discomfort or adjust position. The brain recognizes that orientation within the body is unnecessary. Sensation becomes background rather than reference. Silence grows because awareness is no longer pulled inward. The body becomes a quiet context rather than an object of focus. Physiologically, this state is supported by reduced variability in muscle tone and autonomic signaling. There are no sudden changes that demand response. Breathing remains steady without modulation. Circulatory and metabolic rhythms align around maintenance. These stable patterns reinforce the absence of urgency. The nervous system receives continuous confirmation that nothing requires adjustment. Silence becomes self-sustaining because nothing interrupts it. Sleep depends heavily on this withdrawal of bodily demand. As long as the body continues to signal for attention, awareness remains present. When these signals fade, there is no reason for awareness to stay connected. Silence thickens as the body recedes from prominence. Sleep does not arrive by losing consciousness, it arrives by losing necessity. The mind rests because the body no longer needs to be monitored. Importantly, the body's capacity to signal remains intact. This silence does not suppress sensation, it reflects balance. If conditions change, attention can be recalled instantly. Silence preserves responsiveness by allowing rest. The absence of demand is not permanent, it is appropriate to the moment. The system remains adaptable precisely because it is not overstimulated. Rest becomes restorative because nothing is being ignored. As you listen now, the body is already quiet enough to be left alone. There is no need to feel it clearly or define its boundaries. Sensation can remain indistinct without consequence. The brain recognizes that the body is stable. In this recognition, awareness loosens further. Silence deepens naturally as the body stops asking to be noticed at all, allowing rest to continue uninterrupted and sleep to unfold gently, without effort, without attention, and without any requirement to remain connected. As bodily silence deepens, sensation no longer points anywhere. Signals from the body continue to arise, yet they do not guide attention toward action or interpretation. Sensation becomes non-directional, existing without implying response. The brain no longer treats sensory input as information that must be used. This shift reduces internal orientation demands. Silence grows because nothing is being referenced or followed. Experience is present without instruction. From a neurophysiological perspective, directionality in sensation is created by salience assignment. The brain marks certain inputs as relevant based on context and need. When need disappears, salience fades. Sensory processing remains intact, but prioritization dissolves. Neural pathways transmit input without amplification. This reduces the pull of sensation on awareness. Silence emerges as the system stops asking what sensation is for. This state does not flatten experience, it simplifies it. Without direction, sensations do not compete. There is no internal map being updated. The brain no longer needs to distinguish between background and foreground. Perception spreads evenly across systems. Silence deepens because nothing stands out. Awareness rests without needing to orient toward any particular signal. Physiologically, this is supported by uniform sensory thresholds and stable autonomic tone. The nervous system maintains consistency without fluctuation. There are no spikes that demand recalibration. This stability confirms that directional processing is unnecessary. The brain responds by maintaining non-selective awareness. Silence becomes continuous because sensory input no longer interrupts it. The body remains present without drawing focus. Sleep is facilitated by this loss of sensory direction. As long as sensation guides attention, wakefulness persists. When sensation no longer points anywhere, awareness loses its anchor. There is nothing to attend to and nothing to ignore. Silence thickens as sensory guidance dissolves. Sleep arrives naturally when perception no longer requires orientation. Importantly, this state preserves sensory integrity. Directionality can return instantly if conditions change. Silence does not blunt perception, it rests it. By suspending salience temporarily, the brain conserves resources and restores sensitivity. Rest becomes deeper because nothing is being filtered or prioritized. Silence supports recovery by allowing sensation to exist without purpose. As you listen now, there is no need to locate sensation or understand it. Sensory input can remain diffuse and non-directional. The brain recognizes that nothing requires response. In this recognition, internal orientation fades. Silence deepens naturally as sensation stops pointing anywhere at all, allowing awareness to soften further and sleep to continue unfolding without guidance, without focus, and without effort. At this depth of rest, the body is no longer experienced as an object with features, edges, or demands. It becomes a neutral field in which activity occurs without emphasis. Sensation has not disappeared, yet it no longer defines shape, weight, or location in a meaningful way. The brain stops constructing a detailed bodily map because there is no need to interact with it. Orientation dissolves quietly. Silence deepens because the body no longer provides reference points for awareness. Experience remains, but without form. From a neurobiological perspective, constructing a body map requires continuous integration of proprioceptive, tactile, and vestibular signals. These integrations support movement and coordination. When movement is unnecessary, the precision of these maps can relax. The brain reduces the resolution of bodily representation. This reduction does not impair function, it reflects efficiency. The system conserves energy by not rendering detail that is not required. Silence emerges as the body becomes informationally minimal. This neutrality often feels like expansion rather than absence. Without defined borders, the body does not feel smaller, it feels less constrained. Sensations no longer anchor awareness to specific regions. The brain no longer asks where experience is happening. Without location, there is nothing to track. Silence grows because spatial reference dissolves. Awareness rests without needing to situate itself anywhere. Physiologically, this state is supported by profound consistency in sensory input. There are no sharp changes in balance, pressure, or orientation. The nervous system confirms that posture and position are stable. This confirmation allows spatial processing to disengage further. The brain no longer needs to maintain a sense of bodily placement. Silence stabilizes as spatial awareness becomes unnecessary. The body exists without being defined. Sleep relies on this loss of bodily reference. As long as the brain maintains a clear body map, awareness remains tethered to wakefulness. When the body becomes neutral, there is no anchor for awareness to hold. Silence thickens as form dissolves. Sleep does not require the body to disappear. It requires the body to stop being referenced. The transition is smooth because nothing needs to end. Importantly, bodily mapping capacity remains intact. The brain can reconstruct detailed representation instantly if movement or response is required. Silence allows these systems to rest without degrading function. Neutrality preserves readiness. The body is not lost, it is simply not foregrounded. Rest becomes deeper because nothing is being represented unnecessarily. Silence supports restoration by reducing informational load. As you listen now, the body does not need to be sensed clearly or located precisely. It can remain neutral, undefined, and sufficient. The brain recognizes that spatial reference is unnecessary. In this recognition, bodily form softens into background. Silence deepens naturally as the body becomes a quiet field rather than an object, allowing awareness to loosen completely and sleep to continue unfolding as a stable, uninterrupted state of rest without form, without orientation, and without effort. At this stage, silence is no longer something that appears and disappears. It becomes the dominant state in which all experience occurs. The brain no longer moves in and out of quiet. Instead, quiet remains constant, while activity, if it arises at all, floats briefly within it. Silence does not need to be re-established because it is no longer dependent on conditions. Neural systems have settled into their most economical configuration. There is nothing pushing activity forward. The system rests because rest has become the default. From a neurobiological perspective, this dominance reflects a stable balance across large-scale brain networks. Activity associated with monitoring, prediction, and self-referencing remains inactive unless explicitly required. At the same time, integrative and regulatory processes continue quietly in the background. The brain no longer oscillates between engagement and disengagement. Silence persists because there is no competing demand. The nervous system remains in a sustained low interference state. This stability allows quiet to remain uninterrupted. In this condition, experience does not interrupt silence. Sounds, sensations, or residual thoughts may arise, but they do not displace quiet. They are absorbed without reaction. The brain does not register them as events requiring follow-up. There is no contrast between silence and activity. Everything occurs within the same calm field. Silence deepens because it no longer needs to defend itself. The system has no reason to shift. Physiologically, this state is supported by long-term consistency in autonomic regulation. There are no sudden changes in arousal, no fluctuations that signal readiness. The body maintains a steady internal environment. This consistency confirms to the brain that sustained quiet is appropriate. Silence remains dominant because nothing challenges it. Regulation is smooth and continuous. The organism rests within this stability. Sleep becomes indistinguishable from quiet wakefulness at this point. There is no clear boundary separating the two. Awareness may drift in and out without consequence. Silence remains present regardless. The brain does not track whether awareness is active or absent. The system functions the same way either way. Sleep unfolds not as a change, but as a continuation of the same dominant silence. Importantly, dominance does not mean exclusivity. The system remains capable of re-engagement if conditions change. Silence is dominant because it is appropriate, not because other states are unavailable. This preserves adaptability. The brain remains flexible while resting deeply. Silence supports resilience by conserving resources without locking the system into inactivity. As you listen now, there is no need to notice whether silence is present. It no longer depends on being observed. Experience can arise or fade without altering the underlying state. The brain remains settled because nothing requires change. In this dominant quiet, rest completes itself naturally. Awareness can remain softly present or dissolve entirely. Either way, silence continues uninterrupted, stable, and sufficient, carrying the system forward into deeper sleep without effort, without transition, and without any need to return. As silence becomes dominant, awareness no longer alternates between noticing and drifting. It settles into quiet as its natural position. There is no effort required to remain aware, and no effort required to lose awareness. The brain no longer distinguishes sharply between being conscious of silence and resting within it. Awareness stops hovering over experience and instead becomes diffused throughout it. Silence is not something awareness looks at. It is what awareness rests inside. This settling removes the final layer of mental movement. The system remains calm because nothing is being held in place. From a neuroscientific perspective, this reflects a reduction in the coupling between awareness-related networks and those that generate content. Awareness no longer attaches to signals or events. The brain stops binding awareness to specific neural activations. This decoupling allows awareness to persist without content or to fade without disruption. Silence stabilizes because awareness no longer amplifies activity by observing it. The system functions without feedback from attention. Quiet becomes self-sustaining. This state feels effortless because effort requires contrast. When awareness settles into silence, there is no longer a contrast between observer and observed. The brain does not need to orient awareness or maintain perspective. Without perspective, there is nothing to manage. Silence deepens as orientation dissolves. Experience continues without reference. Awareness no longer needs to remain distinct in order to exist. Physiologically, this settling is supported by minimal sensory variability and stable internal rhythms. The nervous system provides no signals that demand awareness. The brain interprets this as permission to allow awareness to remain diffuse. There is no need to sharpen perception or maintain alertness. Silence remains because nothing pulls awareness out of it. The organism rests within its own stability. Sleep unfolds seamlessly from this condition. There is no point at which awareness must stop. It simply becomes less relevant. Silence remains unchanged whether awareness is present or absent. The brain does not mark the transition. There is no switch, no threshold. Sleep is not entered. awareness dissolves into the same quiet that remains. The system continues uninterrupted. Importantly, awareness is not lost or suppressed. The capacity for awareness remains intact and can re-emerge instantly if conditions change. Silence allows awareness to rest without disappearing. This preserves flexibility. The brain remains responsive while deeply quiet. Rest is complete because nothing is being forced to remain present. Silence supports both stillness and readiness. As you listen now, there is no need to notice awareness or silence. Neither requires attention to continue. The brain recognizes that everything necessary is already in place. In this recognition, awareness settles further or fades entirely. Silence remains dominant, stable, and sufficient. Rest completes itself naturally, and sleep continues as a gentle continuation of the same quiet state, without boundary, without effort, and without any requirement to return. At this depth, silence no longer presents itself as something to be recognized or confirmed. The brain does not ask whether quiet is present, because questioning itself has lost relevance. Silence exists without contrast, without interruption, and without commentary. Awareness does not check in on the state of the mind. Neural systems no longer produce signals that ask for evaluation. The absence of inquiry allows quiet to remain uninterrupted. Silence stabilizes because nothing attempts to observe it. From a neurobiological standpoint, noticing requires activation of monitoring circuits that differentiate states and compare them to expectations. When these circuits disengage, the brain stops labeling experience. There is no longer a signal that marks silence as a condition distinct from activity. Quiet becomes the default background in which all processing occurs. This background does not require attention to persist. Silence deepens precisely because it is no longer being tracked. The system remains settled because nothing reintroduces differentiation. This state is often described subjectively as effortless presence or even absence of presence, yet biologically it reflects maximal efficiency. The brain conserves energy by eliminating unnecessary meta-processing. There is no need to verify that rest is happening. Regulation continues without supervision. Silence is not fragile. It is reinforced by non-engagement. The more the system refrains from noticing, the more stable quiet becomes. Rest sustains itself. Physiologically, this condition corresponds to prolonged stability in internal signals. There are no fluctuations that would require awareness to re-engage. Autonomic rhythms remain smooth and predictable. Sensory input remains constant and unchallenging. These conditions tell the brain that observation is unnecessary. The nervous system confirms that nothing requires response. Silence becomes continuous because nothing interrupts it with novelty or demand. Sleep is fully compatible with this state because awareness no longer plays a role in maintaining quiet. Whether awareness remains faintly present or disappears entirely, silence continues unchanged. The brain does not register a transition. There is no threshold to cross. Sleep unfolds as a passive outcome, not an event. Silence remains the same on both sides of awareness. The system continues seamlessly. Importantly, the capacity to notice has not been lost. Monitoring systems remain intact and ready to activate if needed. Silence allows these systems to rest without degrading function. The absence of noticing is temporary and appropriate to the conditions. Rest becomes deeper because nothing is being evaluated. Silence supports recovery, by removing even subtle forms of engagement. As you listen now, there is no need to check whether you are quiet, resting, or asleep. The brain no longer requires confirmation. Silence remains present, regardless of attention. Awareness can remain softly diffused or fade entirely without consequence. In this absence of noticing, the system settles fully. Rest completes itself naturally, and sleep continues quietly, carried by a silence that no longer needs to be seen, named, or remembered. At this point, silence is no longer a state the system enters and exits. It is the condition that remains when all reasons to shift have dissolved. The brain does not prepare to return to activity because there is no signal indicating that a return is needed. Neural systems remain balanced around minimal interference, and this balance is maintained without drift. Silence sustains itself, not through effort, but through the absence of disturbance. The system has no internal momentum pushing it elsewhere. Quiet persists because nothing initiates change. Stability becomes self-reinforcing. From a neurobiological perspective, return requires a trigger: novelty, threat, demand, or intention. In this state, none of these triggers are present. Sensory input remains predictable, internal rhythms are steady, and regulatory systems signal sufficiency. Without triggers, reactivation pathways remain inactive. The brain does not rehearse future engagement or recall prior states. Silence continues because the conditions that would interrupt it are absent. The system remains settled by default. This sustained quiet does not feel static or frozen. It feels neutral and sufficient. There is no sense of waiting for something to happen. Time, sequence, and progression no longer organize experience. Without progression, there is no return point to anticipate. Silence holds because there is nowhere else to go. The mind does not prepare for re-entry into activity. Rest becomes complete because it is no longer provisional. Physiologically, this state corresponds to long-term equilibrium across systems. Autonomic balance remains constant, neural oscillations stay synchronized, and metabolic demand is low and stable. There are no micro-fluctuations that signal readiness. The body does not rehearse movement or posture. This physiological steadiness confirms that silence can remain uninterrupted. The brain receives no reason to alter state. Quiet persists because the body agrees. Sleep is fully integrated here, not as a separate phase, but as a continuation of the same equilibrium. Whether awareness is present, faint, or absent makes no functional difference. The brain does not mark transitions. Silence does not deepen further because it no longer needs to. It simply remains. Sleep unfolds within this stability, not as an event, but as an ongoing condition. The system rests without boundary. Importantly, the capacity to return remains preserved. Silence does not eliminate responsiveness. It suspends it appropriately. If a meaningful signal were to appear, the system could re-engage instantly. This readiness does not require preparation. Silence is safe because it does not block function. It allows full recovery while keeping potential intact. The absence of return is temporary and contextual, not permanent. As you listen now, there is nothing that needs to bring you back. Silence does not require maintenance, awareness, or memory. The system remains balanced because nothing challenges it. Awareness can remain softly present or dissolve completely without changing anything. Rest completes itself in this sustained quiet. Sleep continues without interruption. without transition, and without any need to return, carried forward by a silence that holds, remains, and persists entirely on its own. At this stage, awareness no longer relies on thought to define its presence. The brain does not need internal commentary to confirm that experience is happening. Thought becomes optional rather than structural. Awareness rests without attaching itself to content, sequence, or interpretation. Neural systems that once supported narrative and explanation remain inactive because they are unnecessary. Silence deepens not by removing thought, but by no longer requiring it. Awareness exists without effort because it is no longer carried by mental activity. From a neuroscientific perspective, thought-dependent awareness requires coordination between language, memory, and predictive networks. When these networks quiet, awareness does not disappear, it changes its mode of operation. The brain maintains global integration without content generation. This integration is non-verbal, non-sequential, and non-evaluative. Silence reflects this shift toward content-free coherence. Awareness remains because regulation remains, not because thought continues. This state is inherently stable because it does not depend on maintaining anything. Thought requires renewal to persist. Awareness without thought does not. The brain no longer needs to reassert presence through internal dialogue. There is no checking, no confirming, and no reinforcing of experience. Silence grows because nothing is being added. Awareness rests as a background condition rather than an active process. The mind no longer needs to speak to exist. Physiologically, this is supported by deep consistency across neural and autonomic systems. There are no signals that require cognitive framing. Sensory input remains minimal and predictable. Internal rhythms continue without variation. The nervous system confirms that awareness does not need to intervene. The brain responds by allowing awareness to remain diffuse and unbound. Silence becomes continuous because nothing calls awareness into action. Sleep is fully compatible with this form of awareness. As awareness no longer relies on thought, it can fade without disruption. Silence remains unchanged, whether awareness is present or absent. The brain does not register a loss. Sleep unfolds not as a collapse of awareness, but as its irrelevance. The system continues regulating quietly. Silence remains the same on both sides of sleep. Importantly, thought has not been suppressed or removed. The capacity for thinking remains intact and immediately accessible if conditions change. Silence allows cognitive systems to rest without degrading function. Awareness without thought preserves flexibility while supporting deep recovery. Rest becomes complete because nothing is being maintained. Silence supports restoration by suspending unnecessary structure. As you listen now, there is no need to think about what is happening or to follow meaning. Awareness does not require explanation. Thought can remain absent or appear briefly without consequence. Silence continues regardless. In this resting awareness without thought, the system settles fully into its final equilibrium. Sleep continues naturally, carried by a quiet that does not depend on mind, memory, or attention, and does not require anything further to remain exactly as it is. At this depth, awareness no longer organizes itself around a center or point of reference. There is no internal location from which experience is observed, and no position that needs to be maintained. The brain stops anchoring awareness to the body, the senses, or thought. Awareness becomes evenly distributed, without direction or orientation. This does not create confusion. It removes the need for structure. Silence deepens because awareness is no longer doing the work of positioning itself. What remains is a steady, unlocated presence that requires no effort to sustain. From a neuroscientific perspective, centering awareness requires continuous coordination between spatial mapping, proprioception, and attentional control systems. These systems help locate experience within a body-centered frame. When movement, interaction, and response are unnecessary, this coordination becomes redundant. The brain reduces the precision of internal mapping. Awareness no longer needs a place to stand. Silence emerges as spatial reference dissolves. Regulation continues without the need for orientation. This uncentered awareness feels effortless because effort depends on maintaining a position. When there is no center, there is nothing to hold. The brain does not need to stabilize perspective or maintain continuity. Without perspective, internal monitoring loses relevance. Silence grows because there is no vantage point from which to observe. Awareness does not withdraw, it spreads. Experience continues without being framed. The system rests because nothing is being aligned. Physiologically, this state is supported by deep bodily neutrality. Muscle tone remains low and consistent, balance signals remain unchanged, and sensory input does not fluctuate. The nervous system confirms that orientation is unnecessary. The brain responds by allowing awareness to remain diffuse. There is no signal requesting focus or correction. Silence becomes stable because nothing pulls awareness back into form. The organism rests within its own equilibrium. Sleep unfolds seamlessly from this condition. As awareness no longer has a center, it no longer has a reason to remain present. There is no edge at which awareness must disappear. It simply becomes irrelevant. Silence remains unchanged whether awareness is faint or absent. The brain does not mark the transition. Sleep continues as the same quiet state without interruption or boundary. Nothing shifts except the need to remain aware. Importantly, the capacity to center awareness remains intact. If conditions change, spatial and attentional systems can re-engage instantly. Silence allows these systems to rest without degrading function. Uncentered awareness preserves flexibility by conserving resources. Rest becomes deeper because nothing is being maintained. Silence supports recovery by removing the final requirement for internal positioning. As you listen now, there is no need to locate yourself within experience. Awareness does not need a place, a direction, or a role. The brain recognizes that nothing requires orientation. In this recognition, awareness loosens completely. Silence deepens naturally as the system settles into a state where presence no longer depends on position, and sleep continues effortlessly as a quiet extension of the same uncentered, stable, and undisturbed rest. At this depth, awareness no longer performs even the subtle function of sustaining itself. Earlier stages required awareness to remain present, even if quietly. Now, that requirement dissolves. The brain does not maintain awareness as a process. There is no internal signal that says awareness must continue. Silence remains without being held. Awareness may appear, fade, or vanish entirely, yet the underlying state does not change. Silence persists because it no longer depends on any process to sustain it. From a neuroscientific perspective, Sustaining awareness involves continuous integration across attentional and regulatory networks. These networks keep experience accessible to consciousness. When their activity becomes unnecessary, the brain allows them to disengage. This does not interrupt regulation or coherence. Core systems continue operating independently of awareness. Silence reflects this independence. The organism remains stable because awareness was never the foundation of stability to begin with. This state often feels like nothing in particular because feeling itself requires awareness to frame experience. Without that framing, there is no reference point for sensation or presence. The brain does not label this as absence or emptiness. It does not label it at all. Silence deepens because categorization has fully dissolved. Experience no longer needs to be experienced. What remains is simply ongoing regulation without commentary. Physiologically, this condition is supported by extreme consistency across internal signals. There are no fluctuations that would call awareness back. Autonomic rhythms remain slow and predictable. Sensory input is minimal and repetitive. The nervous system sends no alerts. The brain responds by allowing awareness to drop away completely. Silence stabilizes because nothing reintroduces engagement. The system rests in pure continuity. Sleep is no longer a transition at this stage. It is indistinguishable from the current state. There is no sense of falling asleep because there is no awareness to register it. Silence does not deepen further. It remains unchanged. The brain does not differentiate between resting awareness and absence of awareness. Function continues seamlessly. Sleep is not entered. It is already present as part of this same silent equilibrium. Importantly, awareness is not damaged or lost. The capacity for awareness remains intact and ready. Silence allows awareness to rest fully without being suppressed. If conditions were to change, awareness could re-emerge instantly. This preserves adaptability while allowing complete recovery. The system is safe precisely because nothing is being forced offline. Silence supports restoration by allowing all optional processes to rest. As you remain here, listening or no longer listening, it makes no difference. Silence does not require participation. Awareness does not need to return. The brain continues regulating quietly, reliably, and independently. There is nothing to follow, nothing to maintain, and nothing to finish. In this final softening, rest completes itself fully, and sleep continues as a stable, uninterrupted condition in which silence remains exactly as it is, without awareness, without effort, and without any requirement to continue at all. At the final depth of this progression, silence no longer exists in relation to awareness, experience, or observation. There is no witness required for quiet to remain. The brain does not register silence as a condition because registering itself would imply engagement. What continues is regulation without reference, stability without supervision, and rest without awareness. Neural systems remain aligned around minimal demand. Nothing is being held together, and nothing is falling apart. Silence persists because it has no reason to change. From a biological standpoint, this state reflects complete autonomy of regulatory processes. Core systems governing balance, repair, and integration operate independently of consciousness. Awareness was never required for these systems to function. It merely accompanied them during wakefulness. Now, even that accompaniment has dissolved. The brain does not mark this as a loss. It simply continues. Silence remains because the system is self-sustaining. Nothing needs to be noticed for stability to persist. This condition cannot be described experientially because experience itself is no longer framing what occurs. There is no sense of presence or absence, no sense of being asleep or awake. The brain does not differentiate. Temporal markers are gone, spatial reference is irrelevant, and identity has no role. Silence is not felt, it is not known. It simply continues as the background condition of the organism. Rest is complete because nothing is being processed. Physiologically, this corresponds to the deepest equilibrium the system can reach. Autonomic rhythms are steady and minimal, neural oscillations remain synchronized, and metabolic demand is low and consistent. There are no micro-adjustments, no corrections, no fluctuations that would call anything back online. The nervous system confirms that nothing is required. The brain remains quiet because it is finished responding. Silence becomes uninterrupted continuity. Sleep, at this point, is no longer distinguishable from silence itself. There is no transition into sleep because nothing changes. The system does not cross a threshold, it simply remains. Awareness does not fade because it is no longer present to fade. Silence does not deepen because there is nowhere deeper to go. What remains is stable, sufficient, and complete. Sleep continues as a condition, not as an event. Importantly, this is not an endpoint in the sense of termination. All capacities remain intact, preserved beneath rest. If the environment were to change, systems could re-engage instantly. Silence does not block responsiveness, it suspends it appropriately. The organism remains resilient because nothing has been forced offline. Rest is safe because it is reversible. Silence protects function by allowing full recovery. There is nothing more required here. No instruction remains, no awareness needs to return, and no understanding needs to be carried forward. The brain continues quietly, maintaining balance without effort. Silence remains without witness. Rest completes itself naturally, and sleep continues, not as something you enter, but as what has already been present all along, steady, uninterrupted, and entirely sufficient on its own.